Donc la citerne arrive dans la cour.
The tanker truck arrives in the courtyard, and I note down where it came from and the quality of its load. I connect my hoses based on the quality of the juice in each of the tanker's compartments. We take samples from the cuvée compartments. Then, once we have finished taking samples, we calculate the sugar content that exists in the musts. I end up obtaining a value which will enable me to more or less chapitalize the musts. This means adding sugar to the musts that have a sugar content of less than 10.5.
Welcome to the heart and soul of a house. For the second consecutive year, we are going to take you into the heart of the Tétanger vineyards, at the very height of the harvest. We will explore more technical trades, from the vineyard manager to the laboratory and the winery, as well as meet a head wine grower and our head of cellar. Join us behind the scenes as we produce the fabulous nectar known as champagne. Second episode, the birth of a wine.
Jojo, est-ce qu'on peut envoyer au poste 4 les deux marques?
Can we send the two SMA marks from the C200 to station 4?
Go ahead, Fifi. Everything's fine. I'm ready.
I am Florian Salin, and I work at the winery. Then I reach an agreement with Johnny, who works in the lower winery. As soon as he tells me he is ready, we then open up the taps. It flows out, and then we take the samples to the laboratory where Sophie conducts further analyses.
Alexandre Ponavoy, chef de cave de la maison Tétanger. Alors une de mes missions dans cette période intense et excitante de la vendange est le pilotage et la gestion des mous, également appelé...
Alexandre Ponavoy, head of cellar for the maison Tétanger. One of my tasks during this intense and exciting harvest period is to monitor and manage the musts, also known as the juice of the grapes. The harvest and monitoring of the must is a particularly important step in the creation of a wine. I often say that 70 to 80% of our work as winemakers takes place during this period. That being said, before thinking about the monitoring and managing the musts, you have to think about the vineyard and the picking schedule. Indeed, for me, everything stems from the expertise of the Maison Tétanger vineyard teams in selecting the harvesting spots and fashioning the marks in our pressing centres. The musts produced by our house pressers or those of our outside partners are systematically inspected, analysed and tasted before being unloaded. You have to understand that not a single load entering our winery can be unloaded until we've conducted a meticulous inspection of each of the musts. The inspections conducted by our in-house laboratory not only give us the technical indicators necessary for devising future vinifications, but also help us to prepare a map that's both analytic and, I'd say, aromatic of the current harvest.
Vous savez, l'œnologie est là pour faire du préventif et laisser la matière première s'exprimer.
Enology exists as a precaution, and that encourages the source material to fully express itself. Collecting this information and conducting these verifications bring us closer to our wines and make it possible for us better to accompany them throughout the production process. The musts are then distributed throughout the winery according to their origin, their cru, their plot, their variety, and their classification. Grand Cru, Premier Cru, or other cru. It's important to understand that we don't use vinification to interfere with the aromatic palate of our wines. On the contrary, we prefer to let the champagne terroir express itself fully through the various cru and varieties that we vinify. Following the alcoholic fermentation and total deterioration of the sugar, the must is then processed into wine, and we no longer talk about must, but wine. Vinification then continues with a second fermentation known as malolactic fermentation, which is achieved through the action of bacteria of the Enococcus ini species. Once malolactic fermentation has taken place, the actual vinification process, per se, is finished, and we move on to the second stage in the wine's life, or aging.
Il n'y a pas de camion dans la cour.
Is there no tanker in the courtyard?
One has just arrived.
Move it to station 4, please, and put all of it in the C200.
Consider it done.
Une fois que j'ai ça, pour éviter de me mélanger les pinceaux, ce qu'il faut, c'est que j'aille écrire absolument sur le planchon ce que c'est et où ça.
In order not to become confused, I have absolutely got to write on the small board fixed to the vat what mark it is and where it is to go. So, Station A SMA means it is from Saint-Martin-d'Ablois. There are 2 marks which go into the vat HO7.
Johnny Transo, je suis chez Tétinger depuis 99. En fait, moi je suis spécialisé dans la filtration.
Johnny Transo, I have been with Tétinger since 1999. I am in fact specialized in filtration. Everyone knows how to do everything in the winery, but we do have our specialties, which makes it easier to designate people to the different stations. My job is to ensure that no wine is wasted, as it is a very expensive product. It's my first job, actually. My second most important task is to see that no 2 wines get mixed together. It is essential that they remain pure, and I have to be able to trace everything back to the right vats up above. I have already had to manage 10 vats that were to be filled and then emptied at the same time.
Par exemple, Florian m'appelle, me dit Johnny, voilà maintenant il y a
For
Valbomate qui
example,
vient d'arriver.
Florian calls me and says, Johnny, a Walbom 8 has just arrived. The Walbom 8 on trip 1. I know it carries must from Cézanne, it comes from our press from Pierry, it is Chardonnay, there are 6 marks and it goes into the E23. And the classification and quality are definitely those of Cézanne. Then, in the same tanker, there is some Pierry, also Tétinger Chardonnay, but it doesn't come from Cézanne. It really comes from Pierry. So it is all very specific. That's what I'm trying to explain. We really do process village by village, and we try to ensure that the vats remain separated. And that goes in the C17H. So then, I look at my chart to see which station is empty or not empty. Once I have that, I go over and look and say, for example, you can put that over at station 2, because it's on the left side of the winery. Then I call him back. You can put the 6 Cézanne marks in the vat that holds 200 hectoliters, and put the 2 Pierry marks in the vat that holds only 100 hectoliters. Once I have done that, I call and ask whether we need to chaptalize or not. The guys decide whether or not to chaptalize. It all depends. If it doesn't need chaptalization, I can send it straight away. You see? Chaptalizing. We have to reach a refractory degree of 10.4. If the degree is below 10.4, we necessarily have to chaptalize. Once the wine is in the vat, I call Frederick upstairs. Frederick tells me whether or not he is available to check the vats, since he is on 5 or 6 vats at once sometimes. Because you have to be present, for example, at certain critical points. It might be leaking at the door, the joints have to be tightly closed, the tap has to be closed, etc. There are several things that have to be checked. The lid has to be open up there, if not too much air will get into the vat.
Je m'appelle Quentin Duplat, je suis chef de cave adjoint au sein de la maison de Tétinger. Mes fonctions en période de vendange, je suis là pour épauler Monsieur
I'm assistant cellar master for Maison Tétinger. During the harvest, my task is to assist Mr. Ponevoy, the cellar master, and primarily to monitor the alcoholic and malolactic fermentations. When it comes to the alcoholic fermentation, the idea is to add yeasts to the vats in order to quickly initiate the alcoholic fermentation and preserve the aromatic characteristics of the various musts. Then, following the alcoholic fermentation, we treat the bottom of the mallow vat so as to introduce lactic acid bacteria and launch the malolactic fermentations, which can last from 3 to 4 weeks depending on the year. During the alcoholic fermentation, it is a question of monitoring the density and temperature on a daily basis, so as to know how far along the fermentation is, and to be able to intervene enologically to make sure that the fermentation takes place in excellent condition.
Faut que vous soyez sur le qui-vive tout le temps. That means that you have to be on your guard every minute?
Yes, of course. We track the situation every day, generally in the evening, after the day's work, and all activities in the winery are finished. We know, for instance, that once we have introduced yeast into a vat, we have to maintain the fermentation temperature at 17 degrees Celsius. So the initial instructions are to start the process at 17 degrees Celsius, and once fermentation has begun, we make sure that the temperature remains at that level throughout fermentation.
And how long does that take?
6 to 10 days.
Donc là, on en est à la vinification des rouges.
Here we are vinifying reds. Why is it so important, and what does it have to do with crafting a champagne?
You must bear in mind, when talking about red wine in the Champagne region, you have to remember the main role of red wines in Champagne and the role that blending or crafting plays in our various cuvées of rosé Champagne. The Champagne region does not produce red wines to drink so much as to use them for blending with white wines to create cuvées of rosé Champagne. That is a very important point. And it's a point that we take into account while monitoring the fermentations, and especially when monitoring the extractions, the different extractions that we might decide to conduct, extraction of colour and extraction of tannins. What we look for at the Maison Tétanger is red wines that have a high colour but very little tannin. On another hand, we want good structure, but structure that is delicate and subtle, and that does not stand out too much in our rosé blends. It is also important to remember when talking about red wine, the vinification of red wine is like any wine, other than it requires continuity.
Il faut bien avoir à l'esprit que c'est une continuité. Le plus gros du travail va s'effectuer au vignoble. Dans la sélection des parcelles, la sélection
The brunt of the work is done in the vineyard in selecting the plots, the terroirs and the crops. What I mean by selecting the crop is to be sure to harvest at optimal maturity when planning to craft red wine. So what we want is wines where the grapes are fruity with good acidity at just the right degree. Now, I cannot give you a specific acidity because that varies according to the vintage. The grapes should taste so good that you want to eat them. They must be very fruity. This should be definite with a good sugar-acid balance. We generally say that we use a bit of Burgundy approach to vinifying red wines.
Et la particularité aussi des vinifications vin rouge chez Tétanger, c'est que nous réalisons des macérations préfermentaires à froid.
In other words, we carry out extractions very gradually, and the other peculiarity of vinifying red wines at Tétanger is that we conduct the pre-fermentation cold maceration, or cold soak, over 3 to 5 days, depending on the vintage's characteristics as well as on tastings, because we taste wines in production every day. I mean, the red wines in production under Mr. Ponnevoy. And it's thanks to these tastings that we refine our process.
Je m'appelle Sophie Thévenet, je suis laborantine chez Tétanger depuis 20 ans. Alors,
My name is Sophie Thévenet. I've been a laboratory technician for Tétanger for 20 years. During the harvest, someone brings me a sample from every tanker that comes in. I conduct several types of analysis on each sample. The most important being, I would say, is on the sugar content in order to determine what sugar levels we will obtain after vinification. And then I will control plenty of other parameters, total acidity, the pH values, and conditions such as glycerol and gluconic acid. We'll also check malic acid. We verify a number of different parameters. These basic parameters will help us more or less determine what kind of wine we will obtain following vinification. It should be noted that acidity is an extremely key factor for us to know whether it will be a wine that can be cellared. As a second fermentation in Champagne, we have malolactic fermentation. It is thus important to know if we have a lot of malic acid to start with or not. So all these parameters that I verified at the start are going to give us a kind of ID card to indicate what kind of wine we'll develop over 3 months, when the juices really become wine.
Donc là, on est en pleine vendange, c'est un peu le boom. Comment vous gérez?
Right now we are in the heart of the harvest. It must be a bit of a rush, no? How do you handle everything? Because I have the distinct impression that you are all alone.
Oui, c'est vrai que c'est le boom puisque on reçoit.
Yes, it is really a rush because we receive a lot of samples. I must receive about 70 samples a day. There are 2 of us, however. I have a trainee who comes to help out during the harvest. We have 2 sets of equipment and we process the sample as they come in.
Alors, expliquez-moi, montrez-moi un peu. Là, je vois qu'il y a une série d'échantillons avec des couleurs. So, explain to me. Show me how you manage. I see there are a series of samples with totally different colors, all in small jars. There's a yellow, orange, and a bit darker orange. Can you explain that to me? Because there are really quite a few.
That's true. There are different colors because we have 3 varieties in Champagne. So already everything that is either yellow or orange is bound to be Chardonnay. And then the other colors, more pinkish, are going to be either Pinot Noir or Pinot Meunier. Afterwards you have lighter or much darker colors depending on the settling. When we press the grapes in the pressing room, we will let the juice rest in a vat, so that any heavier matter will fall to the bottom of the vat. We then transport it only once it has rested or settled. If the settling is a bit difficult, we end up with wines that are a bit cloudy.
So when you have all these jars, what do you do exactly?
I will prepare them before launching the equipment. Preparing a must means centrifuging it so as to make it as clear as possible, since the equipment require well-filtered, very clean wine. All results are transferred to an in-house software program, and the results are conveyed to our delivery people and, of course, to the winemakers who come consult the results regularly.
Et bien sûr aux oenologues qui viennent voir les résultats régulièrement.
Et s'il y a quelque chose à corriger, c'est vous aussi. And if something needs to be corrected, are you the one who sounds the alert? How's that work?
Yes, if I do have a wine whose analysis has shown some problem, I will of course alert Mr. Ponavoy, who will either contact the delivery person if necessary or call the vineyard.
To say why?
For example, we sometimes have issues with sulfur, because we have to add bisulfite to protect our wine during transportation. And if too much or not enough has been added, we have to tell them to correct the dosage. Mr. Ponavoy is the one who will indicate the bisulfite dose to add or correct.
But only because you will have conducted the analysis.
Yes, because I did the analysis beforehand.
C'est Monsieur Ponavoy qui va leur donner la dose de bisulfite à rajouter ou à corriger.
Mais parce que vous aurez fait les analyses.
Mais parce que j'ai fait les analyses à l'avance.
You can listen to all episodes of The Instant When, as well as its French counterpart, L'Âme d'une Maison, on any of the podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, Google Podcasts, as well as the blog, The Instant When, on the Tétanger website.